You got your Mac and Mark guys today on Birds 365. Mark Farzetta in for John McMullen, who's over at the Eagles camp already. He had to go over early days. Like, I see Shane. Shane was his guy. So the Colts are in town, so he wanted to get a couple of minutes with Shane Steichen before they get this joint practice underway. John will be back tomorrow, and we'll talk plenty about it. But right now, here with us on Birds 365, we got a guy who's jumped in with us for guest appearances leading up to and then after the draft to tell us how things went. Does a great job for ProFootballNetwork.com. That would be Ian Cummings. Ian, here's my first question for you. How many games is it going to take for some national pundit on the National Football League, in-game, on studio, whatever else, to say, how the hell did the rest of the National Football League, and it's actually only 9 teams, let Jalen Carter fall to the Eagles at number 9? How many games is Carter going to have to log before somebody says that this season?
It won't take long, that's for sure. And I'm sure some people said it already with that very first snap in the preseason when he was, blasting his blocker back. I mean, the dude has insane talent, and people are going to wonder about it. The optics, we talked about it at length leading up to the draft. There were reasons why some teams were a little hesitant, apprehensive for him. But when you look at the talent, right, blue chip guy, if it was just about talent, he wouldn't have fallen that far. And I think he's in a really good situation with the Eagles, with the combined veteran presence that they have in that defensive locker room, and then the Georgia teammates like Nakobe Dean, Jordan Davis, they can help guide him along. So I think he landed in the perfect situation, in the NFC East, and the entire NFL might regret letting him get to that spot.
How about this? Both guys out of Georgia in the first round coming to Philadelphia. So I want to ask you this question. Jordan Davis, rookie year, some injuries. They had to bring in some veteran help there, obviously, to help out Fletcher Cox there in the middle of the line of scrimmage. But when it comes to Jalen Carter and Nolan Smith, who do you think is poised for a more breakout rookie season? Like, Jalen Carter might have the better career. Nolan Smith might have the better career. One guy might be more poised to break out in the rookie season. Who do you think that player is to have the, jump onto the scene type of rookie season?
It's a tough question because I think they both have plus talent for sure. I don't think that's in question. I think Jalen Carter, and it does appear that Carter looks better conditioned than he did at his pro day. I think getting in the situation for the whole summer, getting into the NFL, routine has really helped him a lot. I think, for me personally, it's close because I expect them both to have an early impact. But I do think Jalen Carter's impact is maybe a little more reliant on the guys around him on that defensive front. You look at Jordan Davis, the nose tackle. He's going to be tasked with encumbering double teams and freeing up one-on-one opportunities for Carter, or alongside Fletcher Cox, who, is still a very good player, but a veteran, aging, getting a little older. We don't know how much closer he's going to get to that cliff this year. I look at Nolan Smith, man. His play style, his brand of athleticism allows him to play so free, both as a pass rusher and a pursuit defender. And we've already seen that insane range and speed that he has. He can close gaps instantly when he's chasing quarterbacks and running backs. So I think Nolan Smith, man, he's got that athleticism. He's got that pursuit speed, and he is showing really bright flashes as a pass rusher too, using his hands in tangent with that speed and bend. So I think Nolan Smith, alongside Hassan Reddick, he can be an absolute game wrecker. I'm looking at him to make the slightly bigger impact on the stat sheet just because he is such a free-flowing player. But I think Jalen Carter, his kind of like in college, he didn't have elite production, but you could see his impact on tape when he's disrupting blocks and, shooting gaps and just completely eroding plays before they develop. I expect them both to provide an early impact, but to me, Nolan Smith, with that explosive ability, we'll be able to see it a little more distinctly, I think.
All right. To use the phrase you just used, on tape. That's a big part of your job, is to be able to evaluate the tape and project and see what a player is going to do before you get a chance to do it on the National Football League field. The guy on the Eagles that probably has been the highest riser from where last season ended to we sit here today, their their first joint practice against Colts, their third overall before the meaningless last preseason game. The guy who's moved up the most, at least in my eyes, is Reed Blankenship. This guy's 10 months removed from being an undrafted free agent who the Eagles gave $5,000 to as a bonus to come into camp. He makes it. He fills in for CJGJ. We don't know who the Eagles safeties are going to be. He's the unquestioned number one starter and didn't even have to dress last week for the game, their last preseason game. Good on him. He was a 5-year starter in college, playing at a lesser level than the SEC or any of the other conferences. And now he's the starter at safety for for a team that may very well go to the Super Bowl again this year for the second consecutive year, do you look at players differently? Is there a guy that jumps out with you? Blankenship, the guys I'm pointing to now, but in other years where you go, all right, no, if you're sticking around for a fourth year in college, there's a reason. You're not that good. If you're playing 5 years in college, there's a reason you're not that good. If you're not good enough to come out after 3 years, you're not going to make it in the pros. But then Blankenship happens. Does it change the way you need to evaluate? Because there's something to be said for that experience goes a hell of a long way.
To me, it signifies two things that it's really important for draft analysts to remember. One, we don't know anything, right? We study and we want to think we do know, something definitively, but we don't know how these careers are going to pan out.
Keep that under wraps.
No,
Your boss
man,
may be listening. You don't want to say out loud, we don't know anything.
It's important to be. All right, I know a little bit.
I refuse to accept that. I think you know a hell of a lot, but don't ever say that out loud, big guy.
Well, here's the thing. It's one of those things where, and I think, it's not just that, but it's also the talent pools that we're dealing with in the modern NFL are vast, man. They are huge. I mean, a vast amount of players enters the NFL draft every season. And, it's not that we don't know anything, but we know so little. No matter how much you study and research, there's always going to be that degree of uncertainty. And, I like to put it, another phrase that I like to use is good players go undrafted. They go all the time. I don't think people realize how small of a window 250, 260 picks is. It's a very small window. I mean, there's over 1,000 players in that pool, in that circulation, right? So good players go undrafted. And I think looking at guys like Blankenship, looking back, maybe he shouldn't have been undrafted because he was a 5-year starter. He was very productive against the run and in coverage too. He tested well. He showed off those instincts in both phases. So, you look back and you have those cautionary tales, those corrective tales that kind of make you reevaluate, right? But the fact of the matter is there are a lot of good players every year, right? And it depends not just on their situation, but, what they have mentally too, to kind of get through that NFL grind, right? So a lot of those things we don't really see until they settle in, they get on that routine, they get on that track, and 2 to 3 years down the line, we have the real answers. So I think it's just a reminder, right? There's so much talent that you're working with, and there's so many different variables. We can study and research all we want to, but at some point we have to acknowledge a good player can come from anywhere. So
absolutely, and including, not just undrafted guys. Obviously not just guys taken in the first round can be great, but guys in the third round. And we're looking at a guy like Sidney Brown. So I'm looking at him at least to hopefully be a starter and, get some experience under his belt right out of the gate. But there's become this narrative here in Philadelphia that, he might be too aggressive for what they want to do in Philadelphia. He might be too aggressive for, not giving up that chunk play. And Jody and I just talked about it. From what you know about Sidney Brown and his time at Illinois, what do you know about him and the coachability factor from Sidney Brown, where he can listen to his coaches, he could digest that information, that he could go out there and actually apply it? What is the coachability factor there with Sidney Brown?
Well, I think the coachability is definitely there. I don't think that's disputable. I do think it takes time, especially at the NFL level, because you're working with a different kind of play pace at the NFL level. And a lot of NFL offenses, are designed to get those hyper aggressive defenders to bite, right? To free up that space so that they can capitalize. So that's an adjustment for Sidney Brown, who played a lot of Big Ten West offenses last year, right? So, was allowed to play more confident, a little freer, a little faster. And that's not a bad thing at the NFL level. You want to play fast, you want to play confident. But at the same time, brazen confidence can be a weakness at times if you don't know how to control it, right? And I think, like any young player, there's going to be a process for kind of acclimating and getting that adjustment under wraps. But I do think Sidney Brown, I think as a rookie, you got to be patient, right? Because there are going to maybe be times where he bites and lets up a big play. Don't let it be the end for him. Don't, harp on him too much, because he needs to get those reps under his belt. He needs to kind of get the feel of the NFL down before he can play with that control and that confidence that you want him to. As for his physical talent, you've seen it. The hustle on the field, the explosiveness as a closer. The dude is different when it comes to that physicality and explosiveness. And, just seeing him close gaps, it's insane. He's got turbo jets on his shoes, right? So, you want to have that kind of talent on the field, and the versatility that comes with that strength, that frame density, and that burst. It's very appealing, right? So I think, be patient with him, let him take a few lumps early on, but also know you can play him in a bunch of different roles. You can play him rushing off the edge if you want him to as an extra blitzer, right? There's so many different ways that you can harness that aggression and that explosiveness. I think it's fun, and I think you take the lumps early on and know that he needs that acclimation to become the player he can be.
Ian, let me ask you about another Eagles draft pick this year that Mark and I discussed earlier, that everybody in Philadelphia is discussing these days, and that would be their 6th round pick, Tanner McKee, who has, at least in part, joined the conversation of potential backup quarterback to Jalen Hurts because Marcus Mariota has stunk this preseason. Now, I was a big Tanner McKee guy before the season started. I thought he had a chance to be even a day 1 pick, if not a day 2 pick. He righteously fell to the 6th round because he didn't have much of a season last year. And yeah, I'm up till 2 o'clock in the morning because I got a late night CBS show on Saturday. So I did watch Stanford football. Speaking of stink, that was the way most of his teammates played last year. They were a bad football team. I'm not putting all the blame on Stanford's weak offense last year at McKee's feet, but he didn't have a very good year, and that's why he was the 6th round pick. Tanner McKee, his next to last college year, his last college year, his workouts at the Senior Bowl and or the Combine and the like. Eagles have their backup quarterback in Tanner McKee, as per your scouting of him.
They might. That's the key. And I think one factor that's very important that you mentioned is that the long-term uncertainty at the other quarterback spots, like Marcus Mariota, contract does not span very far past this season. If I remember correctly, maybe it expires in 2020. I got to double check. But I think he's due to expire sooner than Ian Book as well, right? You're not super confident with that, right? They drafted Tanner McKee for a reason in round 6 because you get that contractual security for 4 seasons. And I think that, a big diluting factor for his stock in college football was that Stanford long mesh offense, not a super translatable offense, right? So I think there was going to be an adjustment period for him, but I've been very impressed with what I've seen in preseason. I think, one of my biggest knocks on McKee coming out with his mechanics, being a 6'6" guy at quarterback, naturally, the footwork is going to be a little unstable at times. And I think we saw that in college where, he wasn't always able to get into his proper base before throwing, some shoulder misalignment that came from that too, right? So that was the biggest concern for me, the mechanics, the accuracy. But so far in preseason, it looks like he's improved at that. And it looks like he's maintained that shoulder alignment, both in structure and out of structure as well. He's not a super dynamic athlete, but he can at least get out on the move. He's got very good arm strength. I think that was one thing that really stood out as a plus on his profile. He's not the most mobile guy, but he can rip it. He can generate velocity. So the biggest thing was getting out of that Stanford offense, getting into a pro style offense like the Eagles, and showing that he can anticipate, that he can, place the ball effectively. And the situational placement has been very impressive too. I mean, some of those back shoulder throws that he's made so far this preseason, I really think, he had to get that opportunity to grow and develop and refine his mechanics. But now that he's done that, I mean, the early returns are promising. And obviously, whether it's good or bad, you don't want to jump to conclusions on rookies. It's still very early in his career, and he hasn't played live reps in season yet. Hopefully he doesn't have to. Hopefully Jalen Hurts stays healthy. But, I am at least reassured by what I've seen early on. I think he's got the arm strength to be that backup. And if he keeps developing and improving those mechanics, I think you've got your long-term safety blanket. I really do. I think it's possible.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask you, I just asked you about Sidney Brown, a 3rd-round pick. I want to ask you about another 3rd-round pick and Tyler Steen to keep it on the offensive side of things here. Obviously, he's a left tackle. He's got some experience at right tackle. He's got experience his freshman year, I think, as a defensive end. But now he's being asked, all those are on the outside. He's never had to play in the phone booth before. Now he's getting experience to play in the phone booth at the right guard spot for the Eagles. For all intents and purposes, Cam Jurgens is going to be the starting right guard. But Tyler Steen's going to be asked to be one of them Swiss Army knives of the Eagles offensive line that we've seen guys like Jack Driscoll be in the past, to a point, Isaac Seumalo to that point in the past. So when you look at him, Andre Dillard, another guy they asked to be a Swiss Army knife, but he had some experience on the interior from his days at Washington. So when you look at a guy like Tyler Steen, what gives you confidence, if any, as to whether or not he can be that versatile piece of the Eagles offensive line this season?
Yeah, I think he absolutely can. I was a little higher on Steen. I think I had him in the day 2 range, and that's where he went. But I was high on him throughout the process. I think, playing at Alabama obviously elevates your profile a little bit, but he proved that he could take those guys on. I mean, at Vanderbilt too, before, he can play left or right, and he showed that in college. But, beyond those things, right, I think he has a really good frame, around 6'5", 320, right? The arms aren't super long, but I think they're long enough, and that's one reason that maybe they're shading him inside. But he's got that versatility, and I think that comes from physical. I mean, he's a good athlete. He's got that lateral mobility, very good hip flexibility and hinge freedom when he's responding to stunts, right, and adjusting in the phone booth. He's very good at using, one thing that I really liked from him when I watched him in college, he's got very good controlled lean. So he can play, a little bit past the center of gravity to expand his blocking range and get his hands on. He's got good force in his hands, good knockback power. And we've seen that he can respond to stunts. He's got that processing ability, that awareness in in the interior line. So I think for him, it's just going to be, adjusting to the spacing, right? Because there were a few reps against the Browns where maybe he made contact and then wasn't able to recalibrate his base before making the next move. And then defenders were able to get a step on him because he kind of got caught with flat feet, right? So you want to maintain that synergy. And that's a little bit more difficult to do at the NFL level when the pacing is faster, right? It's going to be adjustment for all rookies at every spot, but especially for Steen at a new position, right? There's going to be some time for him to grow and kind of get used to that. But I do think if you're looking at the physical tools and the necessary awareness, the necessary mental acuity, right? I think he's got everything that you need to be that Swiss Army knife. And honestly, right, I was very impressed with his patience and discipline as a pass protector in college. So if you need him to get out to tackle in a pinch, right, I think he can do that too, right? I think the Eagles have shown that they can coach up talent. And to me, Tyler Steen has the physical tools to kind of build up within that role.
All right, Ian, your website, Pro Football Network, does a great job of covering the NFL stem to stern, breaking news right up to the day, projections and the like. You're their draft guy. So after the draft and the 48 hours afterwards where it's chaos, free agent signing and the like, at some point you're supposed to go, all right, turn the page. We got to look forward to next year. Is that easy to do, or do you get so invested in these kids, the time that you spend down breaking their tapes and writing articles and going on shows like Birds 365 to talk a guy up or question a guy prior to the draft? How difficult is it to just move on and go, all right, well, I got to now look at the next class? Or do you do a lot of follow-up work and go, yeah, I'm going to either beat my chest and go, told you about this kid. I told you he's going to be a star, and he's a star. You got to go, like you did previously here on the show. We're not that good. This is too tough to do. Don't ever say that again. Don't ever say that again. How much do you got to do that with the guys after they've been drafted through camps? You'll certainly do it more once the season starts. How much of that is a labor of love for you?
Yeah, no, I will say I'm still figuring out, finding it myself. I've only been doing this full time for a couple of years now, but I think you find it as you go, and I think you need to strike a balance, right? You definitely you don't want to turn the page right away because every draft pick, creates a new situation, a new outcome for each prospect. And it's so fascinating to watch that over time. Mm-hmm. But you don't want to be caught off guard because I think it's kind of the conversation we were having with Reed Blankenship. Every single cycle, there are hundreds of prospects that you need to keep an eye on because they could be drafted, right? So you don't want to be caught off guard. I think heading into this past draft weekend, last April, I already had a watch list for the 2024 class that had like 400 or 500 guys. So
400 or 500.
You want to make sure
it.
If you see a name that catches your eye and he's not eligible, just write him down, right? Because you might regret it later on. You want to make sure that you have those guys in tap. And then once you have time to decompress a little bit, that's when you start to sift through the ranks and really find, all right, who's a guy that might deserve a little more attention early on, right? So, it's one of those things where you want to cast a wide net. You want to prepare yourself to do the more microscopic work later on. And I think we're at a point now entering the season where, we've done, and Dalton and Ian Valentino, the other guys at PFN scouting department have done a great job. We've gotten conference previews done for each team, right? So, a lot of talent on tap. And I think it's preparing yourself. It's doing the proper incremental work along the way. But then also, right, I prioritize the college and NFL draft stuff, but hey, it's fun to look at the NFL and see where our favorite prospects are doing now because this particular class from this past year was very talented, and I'm excited to see what they do.
500 guys. Are you a flashcard guy? Do you do slideshows on PowerPoint? How do you do your studying?
I'm a spreadsheets guy, for documentation, right? So I think, at the base level, right, I just write the name down. That's, I keep it simple early on, right? You don't want to overwhelm yourself too much because there is so much ground to cover. So I just get the spreadsheet with the positions and I put names in there. And then, once we get to the scouting, that's when I get my individual scouting pages for prospects. So I break it down by trait per position, just get the notes in, the valuations, and we go from there. So you got to do it piecemeal. Otherwise, it's just going to become a chaotic mess, right? But it's fun every year. Sure.
As a quote unquote scout, I like that term for you. How do you factor in the mess that is going to be college football this year with the whole conference jumping and realignment? And their last year, the Pac-10 went to the Pac-12. It's now the Pac-4. It's A, confusing, B, annoying. How do you just narrow focus and go, yeah, I just need to look at a player. I just need to evaluate the talent. I have to be able to put all this other junk aside as to the future of the university and where they're going to go, whatever else. Is that easy for you? Do you have to allow that into your evaluations, or you can just remove it all from your thought process?
It'll be easy this year for sure. I think when the changes start to set in next year, that's when it may be a little more challenging. But, for me, you basically said it. I just, tunnel vision, like what's your realm? What do you focus on? And that's the NFL draft component. That's the evaluation component, right? Now, conference alignment and conference prestige and things like that, they can have an effect on recruitment, transfers, things like that, right? So maybe it'll have an effect later on for some of these teams who are changing allegiances, right? So you got to be aware of that. But at the end of the day, I'm focused on what's on the film, right? So whatever that is, like we mentioned with Blankenship, like we mentioned a few times now, a good player can come from anywhere, right? So you need to be reticent of those changes that are happening, but also have an open mind because, if you cast too short a net, you're going to miss something.
Gotcha. Ian, I like college football. I don't study it till late in the season like some other people might, but I imagine people like you that spend so much time on the draft and college football in general. I would imagine that you might watch a guy like Nakobe Dean, or you might watch Jalen Carter or Sidney Brown, or you might watch Nolan Smith, and you might be watching players like that and thinking, why the hell are they using him like this? He's better at that. I imagine people like yourself in your line of work are doing that with a number of players around the NFL. Like, why aren't you using him where he's at his best? So I'll ask you this question in that context. If you're standing next to Sean Desai and he's trying to figure out a better way to use Jalen Carter or Nolan Smith, and you've talked about both those guys very eloquently a minute ago, but Nakobe Dean in particular, the Eagles are known for not blitzing. We mentioned the thing about now they don't want to give up big plays, obviously. But Nakobe Dean was no chunk plays.
No chunk plays.
When you look at Nakobe Dean, it's one of the things that he does so well. So would you be next to Sean Desai saying, like, maybe a little bit more, send him a little bit more than that Jonathan Gannon guy would send him? Do you try to play to a player's strengths like that? And would you advise the Eagles, if you were asked, to deploy Nakobe Dean in a slightly, not crazy at a Jim Johnson level, would you ask them to deploy Nakobe Dean in a more aggressive manner?
Yeah. For me, it's situational, right? Like you don't want to be, and you mentioned it, right? You mentioned it, a measured change, like not go crazy with it, right? But situationally, it is something that he was very good at Georgia, being very aggressive, shooting those gaps, and the explosiveness and the speed obviously helps, right? He's got that, but then he's also a rocked up dude. I mean, he's like, 6 foot at most, but then like 230 pounds, right? It's a lot of muscle coming at you, right? So you got to be careful, especially with the ability to get under offensive linemen, right? Because they're so much taller. You get under him, you drive that power. He's got that ability as well. And then he can sink around you too. So, a lot of viable components for a pass rushing element, right? But at the same time too, at the second level, you want guys who are instinctive, can play in space, can pass off guys in coverage too. And he's got that ability. I was a big fan of Dean as a prospect. And I think, now that he's healthy, he'll get to show that. But you mentioned it. I would want to use him as a pass rusher a little bit more. Like I said, for me, it's situational. And I think that goes into the more microscopic element of opponent scouting week in and week out, right? Something that we don't always have an inside view of, but let's say there's a center who's a little late on his exchanges sometimes when it comes to delayed blitzes. Maybe you're looking at that and like, all right, Nakobe, you're going to delay here and then you're going to rush in because this guy can be caught off guard with that, right? So, I think it's scouting your opponents and kind of identifying their tendencies and seeing if Dean's blitzing ability can play into that, right? If it's a center who's very good or an interior line that's got very good chemistry, very good vision, maybe you let Dean play in coverage a little bit more, or maybe you kind of line him up on the outside, right? There's so many different ways to use him with the explosiveness and speed he has, but you got to make sure you're integrating it with that opponent scouting. But to that end, yes, I would try and use him in that light when you can because he is very good at it.
All right. As we sit here on August 22nd, we're only 4 days away from the first college football game being played. And I will go so far as to suggest the guy whose name will be called out first in this year's upcoming draft is playing on Saturday. USC is playing. That Caleb Williams guy is going to get his first game coming up on Saturday. He's number one on my big board. That's about as far as I've gone, the number one player. You have probably gone a little bit further. How many names do you have on the ever-changing, and no one begrudges you this, it's the way you should be doing it, the ever-changing Ian Cummings big board for the 2024 draft?
Yeah, so right now I've got almost 100 guys graded.
Wow.
With
almost 3 rounds deep, huh? You
Exactly.
slacker. 32
honestly,
teams.
Honestly,
you get over 100.
I'm disappointed, man. I wanted to, but I was doing scouting for the top guys in the class, right? Because that's where you want to start. You want to get that established. But then we went into conference previews. So that's kind of going through teams, every team in my conferences. So Big Ten, ACC, I had a few group of 5 conferences as well, where you just kind of go down the roster, try and get as much exposure to guys as you can and pick out who's worth following, right? So that was a lot more intricate of a process for me. So I wasn't able to grade some players, definitively, but I think it was a really valuable experience because teams like Virginia and Georgia Tech, like those are teams that aren't on the forefront of the Power 5 landscape, but I can sit here and tell you, hey, Sylvain Ewanjuan, I think is how you pronounce it, edge rusher for
where
Georgia
you
Tech.
gotta repeat that one.
I can't even. I got to practice the pronunciation for him, man. I'll do an easier one. Cohen King from Virginia or Chico Bennett, right? These are guys that aren't on the mainstream, but you watch the film independently, and you're like, oh, there's something there. I want to keep an eye on that, right? So it was a more intensive process from a numerical standpoint. Wasn't able to grade as many guys, but feel pretty good about the balance that we've struck with having that understanding of the top of the board while also kind of having an understanding of how deep this class can be. And I think that's something that's very valuable when you're preparing to enter the season, because as you said, once it hits, it goes fast. It's hard to catch your breath, so you got to be ready for it.
All right, let me ask you one more Eagle question, then we'll let you run, and we thank you for coming on. Very Eagle-centric, since we are Birds 365. We're expecting Eagles to be drafted in the 30s again this year. Obnoxiously, optimistically so, but that's us. But they have a bunch of draft compensation. They got picks that they're going to get for free agents they lost. So they're going to have ammo if they want to move up. So let's say they can't get into the top 10, but anywhere from 10 to 20, 10 to 25, is there a position where the Eagles could, if they added their 30th with another pick and they get up in the first round, if they have a really specific positional need, is there a position in this draft where you go, Jody, you may be getting the 3rd linebacker, safety, wide receiver, an offensive lineman? Surely the Eagles could go offensive lineman, guard, tackle, whatever. Lane Johnson getting old. Is there a position in this draft this upcoming year that you would call right now really deep at a position where the Eagles could get a potential Pro Bowler with a mid-round, first-round pick?
With a mid-first-round pick, there's a few, honestly. I think offensive tackle, like you mentioned, not just tackles, but natural right tackles as well. J.C. Latham from Alabama is one. I have him as a blue chip player. I don't know if he makes it out of the top 10 if he has a good year, so I'm not sure if he's a guy, but Kingsley Suamataya from BYU is a very good player, very explosive, 6'6", 320, super physical guy. So I could see him being a player who's a little raw right now, but the Eagles could take him and turn him into his his ultimate self, right? Because I think they're very good at working with talent like that. So right tackle, offensive tackle is definitely one. I look at corner. I think Kool-Aid McKinstry is my top guy, but beyond him, you've got guys like Kalen King from Penn State, super physical, twitchy. Cooper DeJean from Iowa, very fast guy. He's a freak athlete at 6'1", 210, very good at run support, but then also a ball hawk who had 5 interceptions last year. Wide receiver Malik Neighbors from LSU, if you need a speed guy, right? With Quez Watkins, I believe, entering a contract year, you could go with Neighbors and add that to the slot, right? So I think, wide receiver, tackle, corner, those are a few that come to mind for me, but I think there's a lot of talent across the board for you if you're looking for it. But those premier positions, especially offensive tackle, I think if you need a guy with that kind of talent, the mid-first round, there's going to be options there.
You're making Howie Roseman smile because he loves to go into the trenches. And graduating from BYU, nice. Getting your learning at Stoutland University, even better for a potential NFL career. So, Ian, great stuff. We appreciate it whenever you come on. By the next time we get you on, we're going to expect that big board to be at least 125. You got to get it up from 100, big guy.
I will. I promise. I will.
Our pleasure. Thank you very much. We will get you up again. That is Ian Cummings from ProFootballNetwork.com. Very good draft guy who I thought would be fun to have on this week, since a whole bunch of guys are going to find out their football future. Some very optimistic, some pessimistic. That it's going to be tough pill to swallow for some of these guys. But we'll see what the Eagles do. They got the joint practice coming up with the Colts. Johnny Mack will be back tomorrow. Mark Farzetta and I will be back to put a bow on the show here on Birds 365.